Now, if you look at sort of what's been happening in the last year, or even less, really, around data, there are essentially 4 models of data that have emerged in the last several years. So one I'll call data as an asset. And this is how do you monetize data, right? And all of the business models of the internet giants are built around the notion of monetizing data. Yeah, you can have the service for free, but we're going to do what the hell we want with the data, right? Data belongs to us. Sure, you can do whatever you want on the platform, data belongs to us, and we'll figure out how to monetize this. And this has been a great deal for the internet companies, and that's evident from their market cap, right? These companies didn't even exist 20 years ago, right? And now they are the behemoths, right? Approaching $1 trillion in market cap, all because of data, right? I mean, if that isn't validation of the value of data, I don't know what is, right? So that's where the value really lies. And so the question there has been, how do you monetize, right? And these are rich societies, people have a lot of money, right? So if you can target better, you can extract more of the surplus, right? That's been, so that's the oldest model, right? Treat data as an asset, right? The European model sort of also considers data as a liability, right? There's actually a risk associated with keeping data around, right? And so the whole GDPR framework, this new privacy framework that's emerged in the EU, which they also call privacy by design, is really like, how do you really preempt misuse, right? So let's just think carefully about why I'm giving you my data and what you'll use it for, right? So why am I giving you my address, for example, if all you're showing me is how to navigate? Why the hell do you need to know where I live, right? Whereas you've all seen these apps, right? Like you use an app and they want to know everything about you. Yes, 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 right? I mean, I don't even look at them because I'm too scared to say yes to anything, right? So I tend not to use these apps, but I'm missing out on a lot of the cool stuff that comes with these apps, right? And I'm making the trade-off to be conservative, but most of my students say, well, I got nothing to hide. And I'm telling them, yes, you do. You just don't know what it is yet, right? So I just tend to be sort of much more concerned about that. And that's sort of, reflective of the EU framework, which is how do you really preempt misuse? The Chinese model of data is really for state control, right? So how do you link, how do you surveil? And of course, how do you monetize as well, right? But the Chinese priorities are really more about linking and surveillance. Now, in the old days, authorities didn't have the ability, the capacity to deal with a lot of information, right? I mean, it was just, there's no way you could do that, right? You can't maintain control like that. Whereas with machines, you do, right? Essentially, you have the ability to maintain a huge amount of control by letting the machine do all of the dirty work, all the hard work for you, right? Maybe your assumptions are, need to be questioned in this age of machines and data because the state suddenly acquires the ability for massive control. And if they are clever about how they use it, they can use it for tremendous benefit, right? The risk, of course, is, as we all know, that it can be misused and you might end up with a dystopian society. But if they can avoid that, there's some real benefits to this sort of centralized model, where you can actually gather data and link it together, right? As scary as it is, right? So from the purposes of innovation, it's actually quite powerful. And then the last of these, which I'll call data for inclusion, and this was motivated by a talk by Nandan Nilekani at the same event, where I sort of viewed so essentially what his proposal was that we can empower people by letting them decide who and how and why they choose to share their data, and to do this algorithmically, right? So that I can specify as a user that it's okay for the State Bank of India to look at my credit transactions, right? It's okay for IIT Bombay to look at my transcripts, right? So I decide who's going to look at what data, right? So it's sort of an empowerment model of data. And this sort of flows out of, I guess, his notions of, inclusion behind Aadhaar. And essentially what he proposes is the notion of a data fiduciary, where you have essentially a machine. The data fiduciary is essentially a machine, and it has an interface that lets someone specify who and what they want data shared with, and the rest of the stuff just happens automatically, right? So I call this sort of the fourth model, which is data for inclusion. So the way I look at the world, these are the four major types of models of data use that are emerging.